All right, settle in. Grab your seat and lock in, because today we talk about one of the most feared men to ever walk the streets of Kingston. And when I say feared, I don't mean the kind of fear where man talk behind your back. I mean the kind of fear where grown men, top killers, bad men who shoot people for breakfast couldn't even look this individual in the eye. We talk about Duxie, Ewan Alphonso Morris, the nighttime boss, the man who coined slangs that the whole island picked up and ran with nighttime badness, fully bad, four-corner badness. You ever heard those terms? Because if you have, just know they came from one man. Now, before we get into the madness, let me set the scene for you. Columbus Road, Rema. If you know, you know. Rema is not a place for the faint-hearted. It never was. The community sits in the heart of West Kingston, and the politics, the garrison life, the gun culture, it is embedded in the very concrete of that place. This is where Ewan Alphonso Morris came into the world in July 1986. His father was a taxi man, a working man, a man on the road trying to make an honest living. And here is where the story gets interesting, because young Duxie, growing up in Rema of all places, actually grew up in the church. Yes. The same man whose name would one day make killers tremble grew up singing hymns and sitting in pews. Life has a way of taking people to places they never imagined, and not always in the direction you'd hope. Now Rema had its dawns. Every garrison community in Kingston has its structure, its hierarchy, and at the top of that structure sits the Don. The Don controls everything. The Don says who eats and who doesn't, who moves and who stays still. And at the time young Duxie was coming up, there was a Don in Rema who had everyone locked down tight. Now here is the thing, there were some top killers on that block. Men who had bodies to their name. Men who had reputations. But even those men, when it came to moving against this particular Don, couldn't bring themselves to do it. The man carried too much weight, too much fear. So what did they do? They looked around for someone who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. And they found a 14-year-old boy named Duxie. Let that sink in for a second. 14 years old. Some of you at 14 were worrying about what to wear to school, what girl was looking at you across the classroom. Duxie, at 14, took the gun they put in his hand, walked up to one of the most powerful men in Rema, and executed him in the middle of the day, on a Sunday, in broad daylight. The audacity of that act alone sent a message through the entire community that no one could ignore. This wasn't a boy anymore. This was something different entirely. But with that kind of action comes consequences. The Don's associates weren't going to sit down quietly. Reprisals were coming, and Duxie knew it. So he and his family had to move. They had to leave Rema behind and find somewhere new to breathe. He ended up in Frog City, Maxfield Avenue. If you know Maxfield Avenue, you already understand that laying low there is easier said than done. The whole stretch, Frog City, Quay Lane, Rome, these areas are packed tight. Everyone knows everyone, and the street life runs deep through every yard and corner. So Duxie is trying to keep his head down. And one day he's in a backyard gambling on cards, just a normal thing on any given day in any given community across Jamaica, and one of the men in the game decides he wants to try a thing. Starts trying to cheat the game, trying to take Duxie's money. Now most men would argue, maybe cuss bad word, maybe walk away. Duxie pulled out his revolver and drove the kind of fear into that man that you don't forget in a hurry. Right there. Over a card game. That was the introduction Frog City got to this young man from Rema. Now, life in Frog City brought other complications. Duxie got a girl pregnant while he was living there, which meant family ties. And the baby mother's brother was no ordinary man. He was a top shooter in Frog City, well respected, well feared, had his own circle of bad men around him. For a while, things were tense but manageable. That changed when this same brother-in-law had an altercation with Duxie's friends, went as far as pulling out his gun and threatening to kill them. Duxie didn't react right away. He watched. He waited. He let the man feel comfortable again. Sunday came around. The brother-in-law and his friends were on the football field playing ball, having a good time, relaxed, no guards up. That's when Duxie and his friend walked onto the field, and Duxie took out his gun and killed him right there. One of the man's friends tried to run. They ran him down and killed him too. The football field turned into pure chaos, people scattering in every direction, running for their lives. Just like that, what was a Sunday afternoon football match became a crime scene. Now the brother-in-law had his own connections, bad man friends who weren't going to just accept what happened. One day they came to Duxie's grandmother's yard and fired a barrage of shots. His grandmother had to run for her life to avoid being hit in her own home. Now, if you want to understand who Duxie was at the core, this is where you get your clearest picture. That night, Duxie didn't sleep. He stayed up the entire night watching two of the men who shot up his grandmother's yard, watch them drink, watch them smoke, watch them laugh and carry on without a care in the world. And when morning came, he walked out and killed them both. Cold, calculated, patient. The others who had taken part in that shooting scattered in fear when they realized what had happened. But the problem now was that everyone had seen Duxie commit these acts. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He was a wanted man. His face was known. And instead of pulling back, instead of trying to disappear, Duxie went back for every single one of the brother-in-law's friends and killed them one by one. Systematic, relentless, merciless. Now, this level of activity doesn't go unnoticed. Word travels, especially when you're moving the way Duxie was moving. And the word reached a Don living in Foreign, a man known as Squidly, also called Big Call. Big Call heard about the murders, heard about the criminal acts, heard the name Duxie coming up again and again in conversations about serious street activity across Jamaica, and he wanted to know who this person was. He was curious, and when Big Call got curious about you in that way, it meant your reputation had crossed borders. Big Call started financially supporting Duxie, and with that backing, everything changed. Duxie now had resources, and with resources came structure. He formed his own gang. He became a hired hitman, carrying out contracts in almost every parish across Jamaica. Not just Kingston, not just his corner, every parish. The man was operating on a national level, and the way he moved was smart. Duxie and his crew would rent luxury vehicles, Prados, BMWs when they were going out to carry out their operations. Think about that strategy for a moment. Police and potential victims are looking for certain types of vehicles, certain profiles. Nobody is expecting the men stepping out of a luxury SUV to be coming for them. It was camouflage. It was tactical thinking that you don't normally associate with street-level criminals. Duxie was operating on a different level. Around this time, while still connected to Rema, there was an incident where Duxie killed a soldier and took his rifle. A military man. His weapon taken. 3 men actually got arrested for that killing. 3 innocent men sat in police custody for a murder they didn't commit, and Duxie, the real killer, walked free. That tells you something about how this man operated and how deep the fear of him ran in the communities around him. Nobody was talking. Eventually, Duxie connected with the Don of the area known as Mocky Puss. bringing his crew with him and embedding himself into the wider network operating out of Maxfield Avenue and its surrounding communities. Now, you have to understand the geography to understand the politics. Frog City, Key Lane, and Rome are all close together under Maxfield Avenue. Each had their own Don. Rome originally had a Don named Leo, but Leo had to leave the area behind due to a murder incident, and that vacancy is how Marky Puss stepped up and took control of Rome. Then, on the other side, you had the Waltham Park area running all the way to 2 Mile, and that territory belonged to Machine Man and the Rat Bat Gang. Now, Marky Puss and Machine Man had what you would call a mutual understanding. They were cool. Business was business, and neither man was looking for unnecessary conflict. But the street has a way of disrupting even the most carefully maintained peace. Machine Man's own nephew went ahead and shot Marky Puss. And, here is the part that makes this story more tangled than a bowl of spaghetti. Marky Puss's nephew was Machine Man's right-hand man. So you have family ties crossing enemy lines, loyalties splitting down the middle, and a bullet in Marky Puss's foot as the end result. Somehow, nothing major came of it directly. But the understanding between the two sides was never quite the same after that. Machine Man's top killer at the time was a man called Blacker Douche, a very serious individual. Naturally didn't like people. And in a world where most bad men at least perform a level of social interaction when it suits them, Blacker Douche didn't bother with the performance. People didn't like him, he didn't like people, and everyone understood where they stood. Now Duxie wanted in with Machine Man's operation, so he did what he always did. He moved strategically. He linked up with Andrew, a top shooter from the Rat Bat Gang. Andrew became the inside connection, showing Duxie who Machine Man's enemies were, pointing out the targets, mapping out the landscape. And Duxie started removing those enemies one by one. Machine Man watched this happening and loved what he saw. A man who delivers results without being asked twice is a valuable asset in any organization, legal or otherwise, and so Duxie earned his place. He was given his own gang operating under the Rat Bat umbrella. Now let me pause here for a second and just make sure you are fully appreciating what we are looking at. This is a man who started in Rema at 14 years old, moved through Frog City leaving bodies behind him, got backing from a Don in foreign, became a national hitman operating across every parish in Jamaica, and then embedded himself into one of the most significant gang structures in the Maxfield and Waltham Park corridor, earning his own command within that structure. And all of this while the entire city was starting to hear two names constantly compared to each other in the same breath, Duxie and Duppy Film. Now, Duppy Film had a reputation that was larger than life, a name that carried enormous weight in the street narrative of Kingston. But the comparison being made was not a comparison between two equals. The word on the street was that Duxie's badness compared to Duppy Film was like a monster compared to a little child. That is the kind of language people were using. And it's worth noting something else that connects these two names. There was a video that circulated at one point that was mistakenly attributed to Duppy Film. People saw it, shared it, talked about it, and blamed Duppy Film for murders connected to that footage. But the person in that video was Duxie, not Duppy Film, Duxie. Which means that some of the fear, some of the weight that Duppy Film carried in people's minds during that period was actually fear that belonged to Duxie. And through all of this, the murders, the contracts, the gang, the territory, the luxury cars, the foreign connections, the hits across every parish, Duxie reigned terror across Maxfield Avenue and Waltham Park. The man who grew up in the church on Columbus Road had become the undisputed nighttime boss, a title that wasn't given to him. a title that was earned through actions that the streets of Kingston will be talking about for a very long time.